I don't think I need to tell anyone in this audience that America was founded on Judeo-Christian values, Judeo-Christian principles. But neither do I have to tell you that many in America today have walked away from that. In fact, the real question is now how many Americans actually still maintain a biblical worldview. And speaking of that, across the country, does a biblical worldview differ from state to state? Does it differ from region to region? Are there particular traits that are in common with more biblically engaged states versus ones that hold to a more biblical outlook? Well, here now to share more about what he has found in this whole discussion is Dr. George Barna. Of course, he's professor at Arizona Christian University, where he leads their Cultural Research Center. And he is also senior fellow here at the Family Research Council's Center for Biblical Worldview. Dr. Barna, always an honor to have you on the program, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Jody, thank you. It's always great to be with you.
Well, I have been absolutely fascinated by this recent study you have given. I've heard you speak about it in other places, and I've just been sounding the alarm here saying we've got to have George on to talk about this. So thank you for coming on. Let me begin with this, because I believe this is foundational for us to kind of help understand all of this. Your study uses the term integrated disciples. So let's start there. What do you mean by an integrated disciple?
Well, that's a term that we use to describe people who have a biblical worldview, but it's not just a set of beliefs that are isolated from how they act in their lives. These are people who have taken that biblical worldview and integrated it into how they live. You can tell that they're disciples of Christ because they've converted their beliefs into behavior. So we use that expression to get away from simply being someone who owns a Bible or reads a Bible or goes to church or calls themselves a Christian. It's a group of people that have committed their life to Jesus. And we know that that's the case because you can watch them and you can understand what they believe by observing their behavior. They model what it means to be an imitator of Jesus Christ. We're all called to be that. The Great Commission calls each of us who are that to commit our lives to making more disciples. But it's shocking how few of those we find in America today. We've only got 4% of adults in the country who have a biblical worldview, which you need in order to become an imitator of Christ. Why? Because we do what we believe. And so if you want to live like Christ, you've got to think like Christ. Thinking like him is what enables you to act like him. And acting like him is what enables you to truly be a disciple. So we've only got 4% of adults in America who have a biblical worldview. Only 6% of the people who call themselves Christians have a biblical worldview. Only 12% of the people who would be theologically identifiable as born-again Christians. Only 1 out of 8 of them have a biblical worldview. And consequently, we've only got about 3% of adults in America who qualify by the standards that Jesus gives us in the scriptures as disciples. So we've got a long way to go, Jody.
We've got a long, long ways to go. And that's why, to me, I wanted to start here because this whole term sets apart other research about, like you said, who reads a Bible, who maybe attends churches, who professes Christianity. We're talking about integrated disciples, people who are authentic followers of Jesus. And when you look at those numbers, it's frightful. We've got a long ways to go. So your research, you among other things, you've ranked states as to where they stand in all this. 4% of the country, but that varies from state to state. Can you share with us maybe the top 10 states with the highest adults who embrace a biblical worldview?
Yeah, if we look at that top 10, what we find is Alabama and Mississippi are considerably ahead of all of the other states. On average, they've got about 12.5% of the people in their states who have a biblical worldview. And again, that's compared to a national average of 4%. So roughly 3 times the national average. Then it drops down to South Carolina around 10%, Arkansas at 9%, Montana at 8%, Virginia and Idaho around 7%. You've got Oklahoma, Tennessee, about 6.5%. And rounding out the top 10, you'd have North Carolina just above 6%.
Okay, so let's go to the other end of the spectrum. What are the lowest? There's got to be pretty drastic. If the national average is 4%, we're starting with some up above 10%. What are the 10 worst states?
Well, by far the worst is Rhode Island. I should mention that our ranking covers only 45 of the 50 states, so there are 5 other states we don't have in here. But 45th out of the 45 is Rhode Island, with less than 1/4% of the adult population of Rhode Island having a biblical worldview. Then the other ones in the bottom 10 include Maine at about 1%, Nebraska 1.5%. You've got Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Connecticut, each a little bit under 2%. You've got New Mexico around 2%, New Hampshire at about 2.5%, and then you've got Louisiana and New York at about 3%. So those are the bottom 10.
Well, as you're going through that list, first of all, my real question is, what is the deal with Rhode Island? How did they get less, or right around 1/4%? But while you were going through that, Nebraska shocked me. Let's start with the Rhode Island question, though, first. How did they end up at 1/4%?
Yeah, when you think historically about New England and where we got the country from, New England, people living there, coming over for religious freedom, wanting to worship God, love God. And now you see what's happened in New England, it being the lowest of the 9 census divisions in terms of biblical worldview. It's pretty tragic. Rhode Island is a great example of what happens there. They've given up on the basics. There's something that we call the 7 cornerstones of a biblical worldview. 7 very basic beliefs that if you own those beliefs, you don't just give them verbal assent, but you believe them, you live them, you profess them to other people. It's part of your identity, part of who you are. You're probably going to go on and develop a biblical worldview. Not the case in Rhode Island, where we find that they're very, very low on these 7 cornerstones. Simple things like believing in the God of the Bible, believing that we as human beings are sinners, believing that the only antidote to our sin is Jesus Christ saving us, believing that there is such a thing as absolute moral truth, believing that the Bible contains that absolute moral truth, that it's a reliable and trustworthy guide for our lives, believing that success can best be defined in life as consistent obedience to God, and believing that the general purpose for our life is to know, love, and serve God with all our heart, mind, strength, and soul. 7 very simple things you probably learned in Sunday School 101, but that's something that most people in Rhode Island do not believe.
Well, so real quickly, and I want to go to another topic, but how do you explain Nebraska and all of this? That was a surprise to me when you mentioned them in the bottom 10.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, it surprised me too. There were a number of surprises. We found Texas was a surprise, a few other states as well. I'm not sure at this point how to explain Nebraska. We've got to do follow-up research to figure that out, because that certainly came out of nowhere. Just as finding that Texas is in the middle of the pack. It ranked 27th out of the 45 states that were ranked. Again, another surprise.
Wow. If I can, George, let me shift gears. Another study that you came out with indicates that millions of deity doubters are now open to possibly being persuaded that the God of the Bible does in fact exist and that he's able to influence and change lives. Tell us a little bit about that. How many people are we talking about in this universe that you've identified?
Well, when we look at the people who don't believe that God exists, and of course there are different levels of that. You've got people who say they're absolutely certain God doesn't exist. You've got people who say they're pretty certain, but not, doubt free about their doubts. So you put it all together, and what you wind up with is about 72 million people, adults in America, who are saying that they doubt that God exists. But then when we look at how many of them say, but if they encountered a good argument from a person they found convincing or persuasive, they might be willing to change their mind and believe that God exists. I mean, we've got 34% who say they're completely open among the doubters to getting rid of their doubt, to saying, yeah, maybe God does exist. You got another 38% who say they might be open if they found that kind of persuasive person with a really strong argument. So there's a lot of hope out there. Even a lot of the people who right now are ignoring God and turning their backs on him, many of them are saying, yeah, but I'm open to change.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, probably somewhere between 45 and 50 million people, based on that, who, at least to one degree or another, are open to that discussion and even open to changing their beliefs about God, the existence of God. So that leads me to this all-important question, therefore, George. What are some tangible things, perhaps conversations, that our audience can utilize to persuade people in their own lives that fall into this category to consider the God of the Bible?
We've been looking into that. I'm doing a lot of research on that right now. And what we're consistently finding is that what makes a difference is when you can develop trust in the mind and heart of the other person. They know you, they trust you, they're willing to have conversations with you. And the best approach to take is not to tell them that they're wrong, not to tell them they're stupid, not to tell them they're going to hell. It's to continue to build that trust-based relationship with them, let them know that you really do care, but that you're really interested in what they're thinking and how they came to their conclusions, and having what we would refer to as a Socratic conversation, which means that instead of telling them, well, let me tell you what the truth is, let me tell you what you ought to believe, let me tell you what a smart person would buy into, instead what you do is you keep asking, well, what do you think about God? How did you come to that conclusion? How certain are you of that? What kind of things have changed your mind in the past? Because we find that most people who today are adults and say that they don't believe in God also tell us that at one point in their life when they were younger, they did believe in God. And so there were things that changed their perspective. And so for us to understand that and to maintain this kind of conversation, then we get to keep asking them what they believe, what they don't believe, why they believe it, why they don't believe it. And what we find is that over the course of time, a couple of things happen. One is that they become more interested in the topic. A second thing is that they tend to enjoy the conversation if we're not threatening them, if we're not overtly trying to get them to change. Now, somebody who doesn't believe in God, I want them to believe in God because I know God exists. I know he's the center of my life, and I know he changes everything in my life. I want them to believe that too. But they've got to own that. They've got to get there on their own. I can't force them to believe it. So having these conversations are critical. And the other main thing that I want to leave behind with everybody is that when you have these conversations, one of the elements that comes with it is the person that you're conversing with starts watching you very carefully all the time, because they want to see, how do these beliefs manifest themselves in your behavior? How does it change who you are and how you live? What difference does it make? Is it real? Or is this just an argument that you're trying to get me to buy into so that you win the argument?
Which goes all the way back to where we started. Being an integrated disciple and an authentic follower of Jesus makes all the difference. Dr. George Barna, Senior Research Fellow here at the Family Research Council's Center for Biblical Worldview. Absolutely a fascinating research and discussion that we've been able to have. Thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing with us.